Despite lockdowns being imposed and work from home being the primary choice for businesses and employers, the Philippine office market rather saw a take up at least in new leases. A study of real estate firm Leechiu Property Consultants show a 50% increase in new leases for the first half of 2020. To help us make sense of it all, we have David Leechiu. He is a CEO of Leechiu Property Consultants. Good morning, David. Great to have you here with us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's go through this one by one, David. First, how exactly did that happen? A 50% jump, at least in new leases amid the pandemic. We're talking 77,000 square meters, if I'm not mistaken. What brought about that takeout?
So first is that that 50% increase is comparing first quarter to second quarter movement.
Okay.
So 57,000 square meters in the first quarter, and the new leases were about 77,000 square meters. And the big driver of that is the BPO sector. And for the first time in maybe 3 years, the POGO sector actually stopped growing, and a few of them started to contract. So if we look at the total first half of this year, we had 234,000 square meters of new leases taken up, and a big majority of that, about 50, close to 50%, will be the BPO sector. Mm-hmm. And I think that the BPO sector will continue to drive growth for us for this year. And if we are lucky, the compromise between the government and the POGO sector will start to happen sometime, I think, late this month to early next month, September. And then we will see the growth in the POGO sector again.
The higher take-up though, the take-up though, at least in the second quarter, is this a normal trend during the season, during the second quarter of the year?
Actually, the second quarter is the slowest quarter of the year. Where most of the activity happens is between August to December of the year, and that's been the case for 20 years already. And I think, at least in the past, more than 50% of all leasing activity happened in these last 5 months of the year.
What's interesting though is that, like what we did mention, a main driver of that would have to be the BPO sector, still eating up most of that new leases. How do you reconcile that with the number of BPOs also implementing a work from home setup?
Well, the work from home is really their attempt to the new normal with this pandemic. But as soon as they're able to, they will migrate back to the office, because there are many conditions that impair the productivity of people in work from home. And second, the concerns about data security, data privacy, and fraud is pretty high in many companies' lists. So they would rather get employees back to work from to working in the controlled environment of an office environment.
And do you see the sector, at least in the office space, somehow being more reliant now on BPOs compared to a mixture of pillars in the past, where you have really the segment relying on both POGOs and BPOs? This time around, of course, you have higher departure rates when it comes to offshore gaming operators.
Yes, definitely the BPO sector will be the key driver now, and that's partly because the POGO sector is in a big question mark today, but also because the global recession is driving more jobs to the Philippines. I think that's one thing that we have to remember, that because of the havoc that is causing this pandemic is causing the world, many companies are forced to cut more costs. And the only way to do that, while increasing productivity, is to move jobs to two places in the world. That's Philippines and India.
Mm-hmm. And you see the Philippines still being at least a good market when it comes to that.
There's no place like the Philippines, to be honest. Many of my clients are saying, where's the next Philippines? And I think the next Philippines is actually Africa, the continent, the entire continent of Africa. The problem is that people are just not ready to expand, and there are many things many structural things I think that many countries in Africa need to do to be ready to accept all these things that we are benefiting from, that India is benefiting from.
But in terms of geography, at least here in the Philippines, has it already been saturated, at least Metro Manila wise and other key cities in the country? Where do you see is the next big location, at least when it comes to BPOs?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, first of all, we need Manila to grow the BPO sector because Manila is the safest place. Many executives will feel comfortable proposing Manila as the first location for their BPO. And the companies that are here is probably 20% only of the entire universe that could be coming to the Philippines. So, if you look at the big picture, many more BPO jobs can come to the Philippines. And those new entrants will most likely prefer Manila because it is the safest option. You fly in, you fly out, you stay in good hotels. You have a lot of, you're in the middle of one of the best cities in the world in terms of living, in terms of cost of living and quality of accommodation. And from Manila, you can do so many things like go to Batangas or fly out to Palawan or Cebu. The second point is that for the first time, the biggest receiver of jobs from the BPO sector is not Manila, it is Cebu. So that's a very, very big thing. And kudos to the people of Cebu because despite all the challenges that Cebu is going through right now with the pandemic and the lockdowns, they are actually the biggest receiver of BPO jobs in the Philippines. It's the first time that's ever happened. And then followed by BGC and Quezon City. Now, we are very optimistic about Clark. Very, very optimistic about Clark because Clark is going to be the next Cebu. I think Clark for the BPO sector will be the prime labor market for the BPO sector for the next 10 to 15 years. Just like what we saw in Cebu for the last 15 years. So many people will say, I will have my first two locations in Manila, and then my third location will be in Clark. And why is that? Because Clark is able to access a population base and a workforce of about 10 million people, which is the second largest labor pool you can access in the Philippines outside of Manila.
All right, so much hope at least in the development of Clark there. But as it stands, you were referring to this earlier. Bogus, on the other hand, driving that vacancy rate higher by 8% or around 89,000 square meters. A lion's share coming from Bogus at 54%. Really, what brought about those departures?
So the POGO sector has been struggling in the Philippines because they feel, rightly or wrongly, that the tax laws were changed on them midstream. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the DOF has got their own stance, right? But the POGO sector feel that the tax laws were changed on them, and so the second catalyst was the travel bans all over. It's so difficult to fly out. It's so difficult to fly in. And so that kind of made it very, very difficult for them, coupled by the lockdown. And so a few companies have contracted in the POGO sector. Yeah, so about 54% of the total contractions in the Philippines happen in the POGO sector, about close to 50,000 square meters. Now, 50,000 square meters might sound a lot if you look at that number, but it is less than 3% of the total space that the POGO sector occupy. Now, there's a fear in the market that this POGO sector will leave instantaneously, and I think that risk is low, simply because if they want to leave, they have to have a destination to go to. And frankly, the 7 locations that they're looking at are not ready to house them. There's no real estate there's not enough real estate to house them. So they have to program an exit in the Philippines that will probably take at the minimum 3 years to do. So by that time, if they exit in a gradual phased manner over 3-4 years, that should not impact the property market as bad. Now, the other side of the equation is that what if China shuts us down just like that? Well, that would probably be dependent on when that happens. If that happens, and if it happens during this COVID, then yes, it's going to impact the property market very badly. But if we do it post-vaccine of the COVID, and if we're able to eradicate this virus from the vaccine, then I think things will be more stable. It won't hit us as bad as if it hit us today.
But you were saying that more or less, if you are expecting at least a gradual decline or at least a gradual departure from POGOs here, how, in a way, will the office sector be offsetting those possible declines that will result from their departure?
I'm hopeful that the BPO sector will continue to grow, and over time, over 3 to 4 years, it will absorb everything that the POGO sector has left. Having said that, I still don't think the POGO sector will leave outright. They're going through a lot of pain right now. Some of them, the timing is bad. I mean, because they're hit with COVID, they're hit with the travel bans, and then on top of all of that, the ECQ, we've added the concern about the tax collection issue from them, and so they're really struggling. But I think they're going to be here for a while.
Mm-hmm. Overall, though, if I'm not mistaken, take-up for the first half of the year was down by 74%. Is office segment already in a point of contraction?
No. So, thank you for asking that, because the Philippines, and this is what many people need to understand and appreciate, is that the Philippines is probably the only market in the world that has not contracted in office space. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are companies contracting, there are jobs being lost, a lot of them, but that has not offset the growth in the office sector. People net demand is still growing, and that's a very good thing.
Now let's move on over at least very quickly to the residential space here. Upscale segment somehow saving the day after middle income bracket saw declines. What brought about that drop in that major market at least?
So, there are two brackets in the high end, right? There's the luxury market, there's the high end, and then there's the upper middle class, and there's the middle. So the middle is really hit hard. Their jobs are compromised, their bonuses are compromised, etc. But the upper middle market are being bought right now by the high end market. The high end market who have a lot of money, even up to today, are starting to buy speculatively projects in the upper middle segment. And why are they doing that? They're doing that for a number of reasons. They're doing it for their kids. They're doing it for for capital preservation, and they're putting it in real estate because they can't trust the stock market today. Right? The stock market is too turbulent. They don't want that brain damage, and so they're putting it all in the property market. Now, you look at how much sales recorded by the 15 top developers, 66 billion pesos of sales transacted in the height of the lockdown. So I think that's fantastic. And how are they able to do that? Because the developers said, okay, we need to raise sales. How are we going to do it? Well, offer discounts, offer extended terms, offer low hurdles of entry, and boom, we've got 66 billion in sales happened in the last 3 months. I think that's unique. Now, because we've been able to prove that with enough incentive, money will get released back into the economy. And the biggest share of this 66 billion pie is SMDC, with almost 50% of that pie just with them, and then Ayala, and then Mega World. So these are all quality assets bought by quality buyers. And why is the middle hit hard? Because there's no debt that you can access. So many people who want to close deals and many people who want to sell their assets right now at huge discounts cannot transact because there's no liquidity in the market. The buyers are going to the banks and the banks are saying, let's hold off lending for a while because the risk of lending is too high. And so if you look at the behavior of T-bills, the T-bills are like down sub 3%, and yet lending rates are still at 6%. And that tells you why, because the banks are very afraid to lend money today. So
All right.
when the banks release the funding, that's when the engine of the middle market will start coming in.
Okay, some level of optimism there still for the property space, both in the office segment as well as in the residential sector. Thank you very much for your time, David Leechiu, CEO of Leechiu Property Consultants.